Welcome back. Today we're doing a deep dive into a year that, well, it fundamentally reshaped the Middle East. 1187, and specifically Saladin's campaign. We're going beyond just dates and names here. Our mission is to really get under the hood, understand how one absolutely brilliant campaign managed to unravel almost 100 years of Crusader control in the Holy Land. It wasn't just a win, it was strategically masterful.
Exactly. And to really grasp that massive shift, you need to focus on two key moments. First, the Battle of Hattin. Second, the fall of Jerusalem just a few months later. These aren't just dots on a timeline, they're directly linked. Cause and effect. And they show Saladin's incredible grasp of logistics and tactics against, well, a pretty disorganized opponent.
Logistics. Okay, yeah, let's zero in on that, because the story of Hattin, it isn't just about swords and shields, is it? It's about heat, thirst, lack of water. So how did Saladin set up this victory before the main fight even started?
Well, the date was July 4th, 1187, and the place was crucial. This really dry area near two hills called the Horns of Hattin. Saladin's strategy, it was clever, quite ruthless actually. He basically dangled bait.
Bait?
Yes, the besieged city of Tiberias. He knew the Crusaders felt immense pressure to relieve it. They weren't marching out for glory, it was more like desperation. So
the decision to march itself was already kind of flawed, driven by politics.
Precisely. King Guy of Jerusalem, and particularly the, let's say, fiery Reynald of Châtillon, they let themselves be lured out. Saladin knew exactly what he was doing, forcing that huge Crusader army across the arid plains of Galilee in the peak of summer heat, moving them away from their water source near the Sea of Galilee. That was the plan. Cut them off.
Wait a minute, though. Marching a heavy army, mostly European knights, across waterless land? That sounds incredibly risky, doesn't it? Wasn't Saladin worried his own troops would get exhausted, or that the Crusaders might try a desperate breakout?
It was definitely a calculated risk. But Saladin made sure his own forces were well supplied, positioned perfectly to, constantly harass the Crusader columns as they marched. The real genius, though, was the sustained pressure, psychological and physical. We hear from sources that the Crusader army was just so incredibly desperate by the time they reached the Horns that they actually stopped. They just couldn't go on. They decided to camp right there without water, hoping for a miracle the next morning.
Wow.
But the terrain itself was a trap. These horns are basically two steep hills with a pass. Saladin's men blocked any way forward, any way back. So the Crusaders found themselves pinned against these rugged cliffs. They were exhausted, incredibly thirsty, essentially helpless before the main battle. The lack of water did what a frontal assault couldn't. It completely neutralized their heavy cavalry.
That's quite a narrative arc. They're battling the heat, their own leadership issues, the land itself, all before the main clash. And once they were broken down, then came the encirclement.
That's exactly when the tactical strike happened. Saladin's archers, his light cavalry, they just surrounded the Crusaders, who were basically incapacitated. They even set fire to the dry brush around the camp. Imagine that smoke, heat, adding to the misery, the confusion. The Crusaders were just too exhausted to put up an effective fight. They were overwhelmed, systematically annihilated.
Annihilated. So what does that mean immediately for the Crusader states? Politically, militarily. Hattin sounds like it wasn't just a defeat, it was a decapitation.
Oh, it was utterly devastating. Much worse than the standard battlefield loss. I mean, the scale of the slaughter was huge, yes. The real catastrophe, the sheer number of leaders captured.
Right.
Saladin captured King Guy of Jerusalem himself, along with countless other key barons and military figures. Taking out the king and most of the military leadership all at once, that's an immediate knockout blow to the entire kingdom of Jerusalem's ability to function. And then, on top of that, you have the spiritual dimension, the loss of the true cross.
That relic. It wasn't just symbolic, was it? It was carried into battle, a sort of protective standard.
Exactly. It was seen as a physical symbol of God's favor, of divine protection. It wasn't just losing an object. For the surviving Crusaders, it felt like losing God's support. That absolutely crushed morale in every remaining Crusader city and garrison. It sent a powerful message both to them and, importantly, to the wider Muslim world. The era of Crusader dominance, it was over.
So Hattin delivers this crushing psychological and political blow. And that gives Saladin this incredible opening, which he exploits with, well, remarkable speed and a change in tactics, too. This is where his political thinking really comes in, isn't it?
That's absolutely right. Saladin knew he'd achieved the maximum possible military result at Hattin. The Crusader field army was gone, neutralized. So the focus shifted from the battlefield to political strategy, and he wasted zero time. After Hattin, city after city just collapsed. Acre, Sidon, Beirut, Jaffa, they fell incredibly quickly, like dominoes.
And this is where it gets really interesting. The contrast between the brutality at Hattin and what he does next. He goes from total war to offering terms, clemency.
Yes, and this points to his larger goal, building a unified, legitimate Islamic authority. Look, if he just continued with mass slaughter everywhere, he'd have bogged himself down in long, bloody sieges.
Right, draining resources.
Exactly. And he would have just hardened international opposition. Instead, he switched gears. He started offering, well, strategic clemency.
What did that actually look like, these generous terms for the people in those captured cities?
Often it meant guaranteeing safe passage for the Christian inhabitants. Sometimes they had to pay a ransom, but they were generally allowed to leave with their possessions. The sources emphasize he often spared the inhabitants, actively encouraging them to surrender peacefully rather than fight to the death, making surrender the obviously better choice. That dramatically sped up his whole campaign.
That kind of calculated diplomacy, it sends a really powerful message, doesn't it? Not just to the Christians, but maybe even more so to the Muslim world he's trying to unite. He's positioning himself as a just ruler, not just another warlord.
It absolutely cemented his legitimacy. You have to remember the context. When the First Crusade took Jerusalem back in 1099, it was, well, incredibly violent massacres. By offering terms, showing mercy in key cities, Saladin was implicitly drawing a contrast. Look how I behave compared to them. This helped establish him as a rightful leader of the Jihad, and it let him consolidate his gains smoothly while boosting his own political standing across the entire region.
And all this rapid consolidation, clearing the board essentially, it paves the way for the ultimate prize. The big one. Jerusalem.
Indeed. He'd secured the coast, neutralized the surrounding Crusader strongholds using this really effective mix of overwhelming force followed by shrewd diplomacy. Now he could focus. He laid siege to Jerusalem and the defenders inside. Knowing what happened at Hattin, seeing how quickly other cities had fallen, they knew their position was basically hopeless.
So the final date, the moment that really marks this huge historical turning point.
Jerusalem surrendered on September 28, 1187, and this event, flowing directly from the strategic victory at Hattin 2 months earlier, and sustained by that political wisdom he showed afterwards. This was it. It marked an immediate fundamental shift in who controlled the Holy Land. It brought nearly a century of Crusader rule in Jerusalem to a definitive end.
Looking back at that whole 1187 campaign, it's clear why Hattin is seen as such a pivotal moment. Not just the battle itself, but how it exposed the weaknesses, the fragility, really, of the Crusader states.
Absolutely. I think the big lesson here is that military brilliance, tactical genius, that's only part of the equation. Saladin showed how one decisive blow, cleverly aimed at logistical weakness and using the terrain, how that can just dismantle an enemy's ability to fight. But the real mark of his genius, his political calculation, was that immediate pivot, shifting straight from battlefield ruthlessness to calculated diplomacy.
And that, for you listening, is maybe the key takeaway from 1187. Saladin's success wasn't just winning a battle, it was the dual approach. He used the shock and awe of Hattin to break their will, and he used that broken morale, offering clemency as a tool to quickly and efficiently lock down his gains. Military force created the opening, political savvy built the empire.
Which leads to a final thought, something that really echoes down through history. We've talked about the immediate political and military losses for the Crusaders in 1187. But think about the long-term spiritual impact of losing something like the True Cross. That profound sense of, having lost divine favor, it didn't just demoralize the survivors at the time, it became this powerful ideological fuel. That loss, that specific loss, became the rallying cry, the central justification for the entire Third Crusade. It fundamentally changed the psychology and the long-term goals of the defeated side for decades. That spiritual void, it demanded to be filled. It demanded retribution.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're cracking open the sources on a really pivotal moment, aren't we? Saladin's victory at the Battle of Hattin in 1187.
Absolutely. A truly decisive battle.
And look, most people kind of know the basic story, right? The outcome, it completely reshaped the Middle East. Huge consequences.
Yeah, the results are well documented, no question.
But our mission today, it's less about the history lesson, more about the actual playbook.
Yeah.
We want to really break down Saladin's win. What were the specific tactical decisions that led to this? We're looking at sort of 3 layers of this trap he set.
Exactly. And that's what's fascinating when you dig into the sources. This wasn't really about just having more soldiers or, a surprise attack. It was a masterclass in strategy, using the environment, logistics, not just raw force.
Right, dismantling them piece by piece.
That's it. So we're focusing on how he did it, the underlying genius.
Okay, let's unpack this then. What was the very first step? The foundational move that basically set the Crusaders up for failure. Maybe even before they realized they were in deep trouble.
Well, the absolute foundation, I think, was laid in controlling their movement. Saladin clearly understood, if you can't beat them head on easily, maybe you beat them on the way to the battle.
So the march itself becomes a weapon.
Precisely. The initial goal was about calculated physical weakening, manipulating their route, forcing their hand.
Okay, so let's get into that first layer. The sources talk about weaponizing the environment. That sounds pretty brutal. How exactly did Saladin use the desert, the heat, the thirst to break them physically before the fighting really kicked off?
He deliberately lured them. It's described as a long, exhausting march. And crucially, this wasn't just any path.
Right.
It was across arid terrain, specifically chosen because it had limited access to water. He basically cut them off from the lifeline they absolutely needed for that journey.
Wow. So he forced them out into the open, onto a path he knew would just drain them.
Exactly. It sounds simple, but it's incredibly effective. He's playing the long game there.
We often picture Crusader knights, all gleaming armor, powerful cavalry charges. But Saladin seems to have looked at that heavy gear and seen, well, basically an oven on legs, right?
That's a perfect way to put it.
It feels like he wasn't just fighting soldiers. He was fighting their equipment, their need for water, their whole logistical setup.
Precisely. That heavy armor, normally their big advantage, shock troops, it became their single greatest liability in that intense heat and under constant physical strain. The lack of water kicked in almost immediately. Immediate dehydration and exhaustion. The sources are clear this severely weakened everyone, but especially the heavily armored Crusader knights and infantry. Their ability to actually fight was degrading hour by hour, before they even saw Saladin's main force in formation.
And, okay, so they're trudging along, exhausted, thirsty. But Saladin didn't just throw his main army at them then, did he? He kept the pressure on in a different way.
No, he avoided that big, costly frontal assault initially. That wasn't the plan yet. Instead, he used what the sources call sophisticated harassment tactics.
Meaning? Like skirmishing?
Yes, using his highly mobile forces, the light cavalry and archers. They never really engaged to win a fight at that stage. Their job was to create constant pressure and arrow fire. Little jabs, constantly.
So no rest for the weary, literally.
Exactly. It just continually wore down the Crusader forces, denied them any rest, any chance to recover, even beside them the sort of mental break of thinking they were getting closer to safety or water without being attacked.
Wow. So you get this compounding effect.
Yeah.
Physical exhaustion from the march itself, plus the heat, plus the thirst, and then add this constant psychological weight of arrows raining down, maybe picking off stragglers, and you can't even really fight back effectively against these mobile units.
Right. They're being bled dry, physically and mentally, before the first sword was really drawn in the main battle.
Okay, so that sets the stage beautifully, in a grim sort of way. This leads us right into the second layer of the trap, doesn't it? They didn't just end up fighting anywhere. The where was critical.
Absolutely critical. The choice of battlefield was, you could argue, the finishing move prepared in advance.
So where did Saladin force this confrontation?
He maneuvered them towards the Horns of Hattin. It's a location defined by two hills. Geographically, it was almost a natural funnel, a natural trap.
Okay, Horns of Hattin, two hills. Why was that spot so perfect for Saladin?
Well, it's fascinating, really. The topography gave him this massive strategic advantage. The hills provided a strategic vantage point. It basically allowed his forces to look down on and easily control and encircle the Crusaders.
Like closing a gate behind them.
Almost exactly. He was funneling this exhausted, desperate army into a killing box where they could be contained and dealt with. He knew they were desperate for water, heading towards the Sea of Galilee, and this location stood right in their path.
So Saladin wasn't just scanning the map for, like, a good defensive spot for himself. He was looking for terrain that would actively work against the Crusaders, leveraging their exhaustion and desperation.
Yes, precisely. He saw the terrain as an offensive tool that completed his attrition strategy. He was creating a trap where the walls weren't stone, they were made of heat, thirst, the uphill terrain, and his surrounding forces.
No escape.
That's the key. The topography served two crucial purposes, you see. First, trapping the enemy, literally no escape. But just as importantly, maybe more importantly at that point, it denied access to water.
The Sea of Galilee was probably visible, wasn't it? Or at least they knew it was close.
They could likely see it or sense it was near, and yet they were pinned down away from it by Saladin's forces controlling the high ground and the path forward, so that physical exhaustion from the march, it suddenly became strategically irreversible. They were geographically trapped and physically broken all at the same time.
Just brutal efficiency. Okay, but the sources, they hint it wasn't just about breaking bodies and using hills, right? There was a third layer. Saladin was also playing mind games.
Absolutely. A comprehensive victory needs more than just physical dominance. He targeted their morale, their cohesion.
But how do you do that effectively against, famously determined Crusader knights, a structured army? What psychological levers could Saladin actually pull?
Well, he seems to have executed a pretty brilliant non-physical stratagem. He went after the chain of command, their leadership. The sources say he exploited no internal divisions and low morale among the Crusader leadership.
So he knew they weren't unified.
He knew their command structure was fragile, riddled with political infighting and personal rivalries between key figures like Guy de Lusignan and Raymond of Tripoli. Saladin likely knew that pressure would expose those cracks.
Okay, exploiting existing weakness. What else?
This was then coupled with active psychological warfare and propaganda, things the troops could see and feel.
Like what, for example?
Well, imagine being trapped, exhausted, desperately thirsty, and then you see smoke rising all around you. Saladin's forces deliberately set fire to the dry grass and brush.
Why? Just to add to the misery.
Partly that, yes. Increase the heat, the smoke, the general feeling of hellishness. But also, it's a visible sign of control. It screams, "We own this battlefield, you're trapped in our fire." And crucially, being pinned down, visibly prevented from reaching the nearby water source. That sight alone would crush morale. It sows doubt. Our leaders let us hear.
Ah, I see. So if you're a common soldier, you're exhausted, you're trapped, you're incredibly thirsty, you see these fires, you know water is close but unreachable, and you start thinking maybe your leader's messed up badly.
Exactly. That's when the will to fight just evaporates, doesn't it? It's the ultimate combination. The physical trap reinforces the psychological one.
It really is a synthesis moment.
It is. Saladin skillfully combined the physical wear down from the march, the geographical trap of the terrain, and this direct psychological assault. It guaranteed, really, maximum disorganization, maximum despair within the enemy ranks right before he delivered the final blow. He wasn't just breaking their battle lines, he was breaking their hope.
Which brings us neatly to that final blow, the actual execution. Saladin had essentially won the battle of maneuver and attrition already, but he still needed to, seal the deal.
Correct. The trap was set, the prey was weakened, but the strike still had to be timed perfectly.
And the sources emphasize his superior knowledge of the terrain and timing. How did that play out in the final phase?
This wasn't about rushing in. Saladin was patient. He could see the state of the Crusader army completely fragmented, desperate, barely able to stand, let alone fight effectively. He waited. He watched the clock, the sun, the condition of the enemy.
Waiting for the absolute breaking point.
Precisely. He waited until they were at their lowest ebb, utterly demoralized, maximally dehydrated. Then, and only then, did he launch the main assault.
So he ensured his forces could strike decisively, as the sources say.
Yes, hitting them at the precise moment when they were already fatigued and disorganized. They weren't facing a coherent army anymore. They were facing, essentially, a desperate, thirsty mob trapped in heavy armor. The final battle was almost a formality because the strategic and logistical battle was already won.
So if we pull back and look at the whole picture, the real genius here seems to be seeing the battle as this interconnected system, right? The sources state clearly these tactics collectively led to the defeat. It wasn't one single trick.
Not at all. They were simultaneously overwhelmed, dehydrated, and strategically outmaneuvered. Every single component of their military strength, their armor, their cohesion, their reliance on water Saladin has systematically turned it against them.
It's just a stunning example of how clever preparation, understanding the environment, understanding your enemy's weaknesses, how that can completely negate what looks like superior strength on paper.
It really is.
Saladin layered his strategies so effectively. First, that attrition phase, weaponizing thirst and exhaustion. Second, the terrain control, using the horns of Hattin to trap them and deny water. And finally, the psychological warfare to just shatter their will to resist.
And if we try to, connect this to a bigger idea, the genius of Hattin, I think, lies in seeing warfare holistically. It's not just about troops and weapons. It's about the physical environment, it's about logistics, it's about strategy, and critically, it's about the mental state of the enemy. all have to be targeted.
The general who only thinks about the fighting is missing half the picture.
Saladin targeted everything around the fighting, the march, the water, the terrain, the morale. That's what made the victory so complete.
Absolutely fascinating. What a deep dive into pure strategic thinking. Saladin really showed that the battle can be won long before the first charge. The real insight is spotting how your enemy's greatest strength might also be their biggest vulnerability.
Well said.
So here's something for you, our listeners, to think about. Consider a challenge you're facing, maybe this week. What's the equivalent of the water supply for that problem or that competitor? Is it maybe access to information? Is it time? Is it funding? Because denying that core resource, as Saladin showed, it's still one of the most powerful tactical moves you can make, isn't it?
Still holds true.
Definitely something to chew on. Until next time on The Deep Dive.